We were on a Sunday drive, just Jimmy and me. Coffee in the cup holders, and we had no agenda. We were just on the road, and it was that quiet, relaxed kind of morning conversation that only happens when you're, not in a hurry. And then we passed a church. It was a beautiful church. It was very structured in their order, very structured in their traditions, and even the way they dressed, they were all dressed up. The teenagers were in dress clothes, even the teenagers. The girls were in dresses. Everyone just looked so wonderful. And, that's not really something you see everywhere anymore. And I was genuinely just so happy. It just warmed my heart. But then, in that same breath, I got a little sad because I sensed that the beauty of the tradition might have quietly become the thing that they were worshiping instead of God that their tradition is supposed to be pointing them to. Now, I'm not saying that about them. I don't know their hearts. I'm telling you, this is what rose up in me. And the moment it rose up, I knew there's something here. Something that a lot of us need to hear and a lot of us need to think about and search our hearts about. Because the most faithful people I know are sometimes the ones who've stopped actually knowing the one they're wanting to be faithful to. That's what this episode is about. Welcome back to Trust God and Be Real. I'm Jera Lincoln. This is one of those episodes that I've been carrying for a while. It started as a 7-day series, so I'm going to divide it into short sections here. But short daily videos, reflections. But the truth is, it pulled me in to talk about it all the way through. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to walk you through all 7 of those days in one setting, and I'll point out when we make the shift from day to day. We're going to talk about what happens when the church quietly becomes the God. When faith gets misplaced and when we end up trusting in what I call the map instead of the one who made us. There is a free reflection guide that goes with this teaching. You can find it at jeralincoln.com or goodandperfectgiftsinternational.org. I would encourage you to grab it before we go too much further, because some of what's coming today is the kind of thing that needs more than just a quick listen. There'll be certain areas that you might want to take a sit down with, think about, pray about. All right, we're about ready to go. So pour your cup of coffee, pull up a chair, and let's get started. Day 1 is when the church becomes your God. Now listen, this is the one nobody wants to say out loud, so I'll say it. You can actually love the church and not know the one the church belongs to. You can also attend every service, tithe faithfully, serve on every committee, and know every pastor by name, no matter how large the church is, and still not know him. Jesus said plainly in Matthew 15:8, "These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me." That wasn't a verse, for prostitutes or just tax collectors. That was a verse about the religious people, the faithful, the most committed ones in the room. The church was never meant to be the destination. It was to be the gathering place, the map room, the place where the people of God would meet to be reminded of who God is. The church is not God, but somewhere along the way, for a lot of us, the building, the schedule, the system, the actual seat we sat in every Sunday, it became the thing. And you know what? When the thing becomes the God becomes the thing. I'll say that again. When the thing becomes the God becomes the thing. Then God gets reduced to something that's manageable or predictable or domesticated. And we don't even notice because everything still looks right. That's the danger. Not the obvious sin, the respectable substitution. I'll move to day 2. faith misplaced. Here's something I've come to understand. Faith doesn't disappear when it gets misplaced. It just relocates. So if your faith isn't in God, it's somewhere because we were built to put our faith into something. So the question isn't, do you have faith? The question is, what's actually the thing that your faith is resting on? Because some of us are putting our faith in the pastor, and some are putting our faith in the programs. And some of us are putting our faith in our own track record. Years of service, years of showing up, years of doing it right. And we're calling it faith in God. But it's in our own track record. But faith in God doesn't need a building to function. Faith in God doesn't shrink or collapse when the pastor fails. Faith in God doesn't diminish when the worship band isn't performing well. If your faith does collapse when those things happen or there's a shift, then your faith wasn't in God. It was in the system that was supposed to be honoring him and directing you to him. That's a hard one. I know. But the only people who get to grow are people willing to look at things honestly. Okay, day 3. This is the one that this whole series is what I named for. And I call it Trusting the Map and Not the Maker. Now, the Bible is a map, and it's a good one. The church is a map room, so to speak. Tradition, liturgy, doctrine, all of it can function like a map. And maps are good. Maps are absolutely necessary. But you can study a map, your whole life and never go on a trip. I know people that actually memorize terrain. You can get on those bikes and see the terrain. You can quote the coordinates, the longitude, latitude. You can even win Bible quiz. Every question they put in front of you and argue theology with the best of them and never actually arrive. Because the map points to the maker. And at some point, every map will ask the same question. Are you going to trust the route? Or are you going to trust the one who drew the route? Because those aren't the same thing. Maps can actually fail. And routes can get washed out. Roads can close. We see it all the time. Things change. But the maker doesn't. God doesn't change. If your faith is in the map, every change is a crisis and every shift feels like you've been betrayed. So if your faith is in the maker, the change is just part of the journey because God's still leading, even when the path doesn't look like it used to look. So trust the maker. The map is a tool. It's not the destination. Day 4, you know about him. There's a difference between knowing someone and knowing about them. I know a lot of people I've never met, or I know about a lot of people I've never met. I could tell you facts, dates, quotes. I might even, have an opinion about them, and I probably do, but I don't know them. We don't have a relationship. They wouldn't recognize my voice if I walked into the room. And a lot of us are the exact same way with God. We know his resume, like we do other people's resumes. We know the headlines. We know the highlights from the Bible, but we don't know his voice because we've never sat with him long enough to recognize how he speaks. And more importantly, how he speaks to us individually. Now, that's not a failure of intelligence. That's a failure of intimacy. And intimacy with God doesn't happen in a service or a conference or necessarily even in a Bible study. Intimacy happens in a space where you stop performing and actually start listening. And unfortunately, most of us aren't quiet long enough for that. Because if knowing about him was enough, The Pharisees would have recognized Jesus the moment he walked into the room, and they didn't. They knew the map. They did not know the maker. Don't let that be your story. Day 5, faithful to the wrong thing. This might be the most devastating of them all because faithfulness is a virtue. We're called to be faithful. Scripture actually commands it over and over again. But faithfulness without discernment is just actually loyalty to whatever is handed to you. So you can be faithful to a denomination that has actually drifted, or to a leader who really isn't leading anywhere holy. What about being faithful to a tradition that started out beautiful? And many did, but quietly became real hollow. Now, faithfulness is a beautiful thing when it's pointed in the right direction. When it's not, it becomes the chains that you're proud of. I want to ask you to ask yourself something, and don't rush it. What are you faithful to? Not what you say you're faithful to, but what do you actually serve day in, day out? What do you spend your time on, your money, and what are you loyal to? If your honest answer is the church or the structure or the system, the institution, then that's who you worship, whether you meant to give it or not. If you find yourself there, just bring that and lay it down at his feet. He'll receive it. He's not threatened by your honesty. He's expecting it, and he deserves it, and he honors it. But it's your performance that's not working. Day 6, relationship without rules. Rules without relationship. The relationship you don't know happen, it can turn bad until it can look good until something cracks. But rules, they feel safe, they feel predictable. Rules tell you exactly what you're supposed to do as long as you do them. You feel okay. I lived that way for a really long time. Relationship, though, is different. Relationship requires presence, listening, and time. The willingness to be wrong and be loved by God anyway. Rules can be obeyed at a distance, but relationship isn't at a distance. So a lot of us drift toward rules because they let us appear to be close to God without actually being close. And the church structure can be a great enabler of that drift, because a well-run church can hand you actually a perfect set of rules and call it discipleship. But the rules will never love you back. The rules will never call you by name. And the rules will never sit with you at 2 a.m. when the diagnosis comes back and you don't know how to keep breathing. Only the Maker does that. Only God. If the only thing you have with God is a list of behaviors to obey, you don't have a relationship with Him. You have a contract, and contracts don't conform you. They just keep you in compliance. Day 7, last one. This is the religion you inherited. Most of us didn't choose the version of the faith we grew up in. We absorbed it from our parents or from our church or from the culture that we were raised in. And a lot of what we absorbed was actually really good and holy, but some of it wasn't. Some of it was just tradition, dressed up like truth. Some of it was control, trying to look like obedience. Some of it was fear instead of holiness. It looked like holiness, but it was just dressed that way. And until you go back and sort through what you inherited piece by piece, you can't really say what you actually believe. You're just rehearsing what was actually handed to you. Now hear me clearly. I'm not telling you to throw out your inheritance. There's gold in there, real gold. Generations of faithful people who walked with God and passed something real down to you. But I am telling you to examine it. Hold it up to His face and ask Him what's real and what isn't. God's not afraid of that question. He actually welcomes it. Because the faith that survives that kind of examination is the faith that's actually yours. The faith you actually own. The faith that doesn't crack when life gets hard. The inherited religion can take you a really long way, but at some point, every one of us has to decide, am I going to keep wearing what was handed to me, or am I going to, put on what He's made personally for me? You were never meant to wear someone else's faith. That's a hand-me-down. And He has something made especially for you. So here's where I want to leave you. Trusting the map, not the maker, it's a real thing. It's been happening since people first got the laws that were carved in stones and started worshiping the stones instead of the one who wrote on it. It's not new. And it's not the end of the story. Because the same God who watched His very people drift and watched His people argue over the map, He also watched His people miss Him right in front of them. That's the same God who still says, come. Not come back to the building and not come back to the rules. Come back to me. Now, if something landed in you today, sit with that. Don't just scroll past this. Grab the reflection guide at jeralincoln.com or goodandperfectgiftsinternational.org. There are 7 sections, one for each day we walked through here. Take them slow. And if you're sitting there thinking, I don't know if I have a real relationship with Him or if I've just been faithful to the system around Him, that is not a crisis. It's actually a really wonderful invitation because He's not surprised. And He knew you were going to be here. And He's not going anywhere. You can come back to Him today. The map, the structure, the systems will all still be there. The church will still be there. The traditions will still be there. But none of those will hold you the way He will. This is Trust God and Be Real. I'm Jera Lincoln, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. This podcast is sponsored by Mercy in the Morning Coffee Company, my personal coffee brand, because mercy meets you before your feet hit the floor. Find it at mercyinthemorning.coffee. That's mercyinthemorning.coffee.